The thunder of hooves echoed across the vast Wyoming prairie as Hannah Mills urged her exhausted horse forward, glancing over her shoulder at the cloud of dust rising behind her. 3 riders were gaining ground, their silhouettes dark against the setting sun of summer 1875. She had known traveling alone from Denver to Platteville would be dangerous, but the urgent telegram about her father's failing health had left her no choice. "Come on, Penny," Hannah whispered to her Palomino mare, leaning forward in the saddle. "Just a little farther." The journey had been uneventful until she'd taken the shortcut through Blacktail Canyon. Now, with her horse tiring and the sun disappearing behind the mountains, Hannah realized her grave mistake. These weren't just travelers, the rifles slung across their backs and bandanas hiding their faces marked them clearly as bandits. Hannah's heart pounded against her ribs as Penny began to falter on the uneven terrain. The mare had been traveling since dawn, and even the strongest horse had limits. The first shot cracked the air, intentionally wide but close enough to send a clear message. "Stop right there, lady," a gruff voice called out. "We just want to have a friendly conversation." Raucous laughter followed this obvious lie. Hannah knew what happened to women alone on the frontier. She'd heard enough stories during her 3 years teaching at the schoolhouse in Denver. The second shot kicked up dirt just feet from Penny's hooves, causing the mare to rear in panic. Hannah fought to control her mount, but the third shot proved too much. Penny reared again, and Hannah felt herself slipping from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her shoulder as she rolled to avoid Penny's hooves. The mare bolted into the brush, leaving Hannah alone with the approaching bandits. Scrambling to her feet, Hannah backed away, clutching her reticule which held her few valuables, a pocket watch from her mother, $40 in cash, and the telegram about her father. Her trunk with clothes and books was still strapped to Penny's saddle, disappearing with the horse. "Well, well," the lead bandit said as they slowed their horses, surrounding her. "What's a pretty thing like you doing out here all alone?" Hannah lifted her chin despite the fear freezing her insides. "I'm expected in Platteville. People will come looking if I don't arrive." The bandits exchanged amused glances. The leader, a man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, dismounted and approached her. "Platteville's still a day's ride. No one's coming for you, darlin'." Hannah took another step back, but the other 2 men had circled behind her. She was trapped. "Hand over your valuables," Scar demanded, holding out a gloved hand. "Take it and leave me be," Hannah said, her voice steadier than she felt as she extended her reticule. The bandit snatched it and dumped the contents onto the ground. "This all you got, not even worth our time." He kicked at the pocket watch, sending it skidding through the dirt. "Please," Hannah said, her eyes on her mother's watch, the last thing she had of the woman who'd raised her alone after her father left for Wyoming. "That has sentimental value." "Sentimental value won't buy whiskey," another bandit laughed, dismounting. Hannah felt her throat constrict as the men moved closer. She'd heard of women disappearing on these lonely trails, never to be seen again. It happened so suddenly that later, Hannah would struggle to recall the exact sequence. A rifle shot cracked through the air, different from the bandits' weapons, sharper and more precise. The bandit nearest to Hannah jerked backward, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. "The next one goes through your heart," a deep voice called from the ridge above them. "Back away from the lady." The bandits whirled, drawing their weapons, but they were at a disadvantage. The sun had set behind the shooter, silhouetting him and making him nearly impossible to target while they stood exposed in the open. "This ain't your business, mister," Scar called, but his voice lacked conviction. Another shot kicked up dirt between Scar's feet. "I'm making it my business," the voice replied. "Now drop your weapons and back away." Hannah held her breath as the bandits exchanged glances, clearly calculating their odds. After a tense moment, they lowered their guns. "Ain't worth dying over," muttered the wounded bandit, still clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Smart decision," said the voice as a tall figure began descending from the ridge, rifle trained steadily on the bandits. Now mount up and ride out. Don't stop till you hit the Colorado border." The bandits didn't need to be told twice. Within moments, they were galloping away, dust billowing behind them. Hannah sagged with relief, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. She sank to her knees, trembling with delayed fear. "Are you hurt, madam?" The man approached cautiously, keeping his distance as if not wanting to frighten her further. Hannah looked up at her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark Stetson pulled low over his eyes. A leather vest covered his chambray shirt, and worn chaps protected his legs. Everything about him spoke of long days in the saddle. I'm not injured," Hannah managed, her voice shakier than she'd like. "Just shaken." She began gathering her scattered belongings, fingers closing gratefully around her mother's watch. "Name's Thomas Navarro," he said, holstering his rifle and extending a hand to help her up. "Most folks call me Tom." Hannah hesitated for only a moment before accepting his help. His hand was calloused but gentle as he pulled her to her feet. "Hannah Mills." "I'm grateful for your intervention, Mr. Navarro. Just Tom is fine." He surveyed the darkening landscape. "Your horse bolted southwest, probably headed for water in the creek bottom. We can track her at first light, but it's getting too dark now." Reality crashed down on Hannah. She was stranded in the wilderness with night falling rapidly. "I need to reach Platteville. My father is ill." Tom's expression softened with understanding. "We won't make Platteville tonight. I've got a camp about a mile back. It's safe, and I can get you to town by midday tomorrow." Hannah weighed her limited options. She could refuse his help and likely freeze or be found by the bandits again, or she could trust this stranger who had just saved her life. His eyes, warm, brown, and steady, showed no malice or deception. "Thank you," she said finally. "I accept your offer." Tom nodded, then whistled sharply. A moment later, a magnificent black stallion trotted over the ridge. "This is Midnight," he said, patting the horse's neck. "He'll carry us both to camp." With surprising gentleness for such a rugged man, Tom helped Hannah mount before swinging up behind her. She stiffened at their proximity. She'd never been this close to a man who wasn't family, but the alternative was walking through rattlesnake country in the dark. "Relax, Miss Mills," Tom said quietly, his breath warm against her hair. "I promise you're safe with me." As they rode through the gathering dusk, Hannah found herself believing him. There was something solid and dependable about Thomas Navarro that eased her fears despite the circumstances. His campsite was well-chosen, sheltered by rock formations, near a small spring with good visibility of the surrounding terrain. A small fire pit showed evidence of recent use. Tom dismounted first, then reached up to help Hannah down. His hands spanned her waist easily, and for a moment as he lowered her to the ground, their eyes met. Something passed between them, a flicker of recognition or connection that caught Hannah by surprise. "I'll get a fire started," Tom said, turning away first. "Nights get cold out here, even in summer." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how dirty and disheveled she must look after her ordeal. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, and her traveling dress was dusty and torn at the hem. Within minutes, Tom had a small fire crackling. He moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to caring for himself in the wilderness. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and coffee, humble fare but welcome to Hannah's empty stomach. "Were you following those bandits?" Hannah asked as Tom handed her a tin cup of strong coffee. He shook his head. "I was tracking a mountain lion that's been taking calves from the Double Bar Ranch, heard the shots and came to investigate." He settled across the fire from her. "What brings you out here alone, Miss Mills?" "These aren't safe trails for solitary travelers." Hannah's fingers tightened around the cup. "My father sent for me. He's been living in Platteville for 10 years now, working the silver mines. We haven't been close, but his telegram said he was dying and wanted to see me." She swallowed hard. "I couldn't refuse, even if part of me wanted to." Tom studied her across the flames. "That's mighty forgiving of you." "Is it?" Hannah stared into the fire. "He left my mother and me when I was 12. She died 2 years later. I've been on my own since, making my way as a schoolteacher in Denver." A school teacher. Tom's expression showed genuine respect. That explains your speech. You're educated. Hannah nodded. My mother insisted, even when we could barely afford coal for the stove. She said education was the one thing no one could take from me. Smart woman, Tom said softly. She was. Hannah felt tears threatening and blinked them away. What about you, Mr. Navarro? What's your story? Tom poked at the fire with a stick. Not much to tell. Born in Texas to a Mexican mother and an American father, learned to ride before I could walk. Fought in the war when I was barely 18, then drifted north afterward. Been working ranches from Texas to Montana ever since. He glanced up at her. Currently employed at the Double Bar about 20 miles east of Platteville. You're a long way from the ranch if you're tracking a mountain lion, Hannah observed. A slight smile curved Tom's lips. Cats don't much care about property lines, Miss Mills. The way he said her name, with a slight softening of his voice, made Hannah's cheeks warm. She attributed it to the fire and exhaustion. You should get some rest, Tom said, unrolling a bedroll and placing it near the fire. Take this, I'll keep watch. I couldn't possibly, I insist, he said firmly. I've slept on harder ground with less reason. Hannah was too exhausted to argue further. Thank you, Mr. Navarro, Tom, for everything. As she settled onto the bedroll, pulling the rough wool blanket around her shoulders, Hannah watched Tom move to sit with his back against a boulder, rifle across his knees. The firelight cast half his face in shadow, but she could see his strong profile as he scanned the darkness beyond their small camp. I'll find your horse at first light, he promised, his voice low and reassuring. And get you to your father by tomorrow afternoon. Hannah closed her eyes, comforted by his presence despite having known him only hours. She fell asleep to the soft crackling of the fire and the distant cry of a coyote, feeling safer than she had any right to under the circumstances. She woke to the scent of coffee and bacon. Dawn had just broken, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. Tom was already up, tending a fresh fire and cooking breakfast. He'd removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. Morning, he said when he noticed her stirring. Hope you slept well. Hannah sat up, hurriedly smoothing her hair and dress. Better than I expected to, thank you. Tom handed her a plate with bacon and more hardtack. Eat up. I spotted your horse down by the creek. She's grazing about half a mile from here. Relief washed over Hannah. Oh, thank goodness. My trunk is still attached to her saddle. Figured you'd want your belongings, Tom said with a slight smile. We'll collect her after breakfast, then head to Platteville. As they ate, Hannah found herself studying her rescuer in the clear morning light. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were indeed warm brown, with small lines at the corners that deepened when he smiled. A small scar crossed his right eyebrow and stubble darkened his jaw. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his face, a steadiness and character that drew her eye. You're staring, Miss Mills, Tom said without looking up from his coffee. Hannah felt heat rush to her face. I apologize, I was just, that is. She fumbled for words. No need to apologize, he said, finally meeting her gaze with the ghost of a smile. I reckon you're trying to decide if you can trust me. I already trust you, Hannah replied without thinking. You saved my life. Something flickered in Tom's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. That's a rare quality, trusting so readily. Not readily, Hannah corrected. I'm generally quite cautious, but you had ample opportunity to harm me last night and instead you gave me your bedroll and kept watch. Tom studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected, Hannah Mills. The use of her full name sent an unexpected shiver through her. What did you expect? A frightened city woman who'd dissolve into hysterics, he admitted. Instead, you're composed, resilient. Necessity breeds resilience, Mr. Navarro, Hannah said simply. When you're a woman alone in this world, you learn to adapt or perish. Tom nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression. We should get moving if we're to reach Platteville by midday. They packed up camp efficiently. Tom doused the fire while Hannah folded the bedroll, working together in companionable silence. Soon they were mounted on Midnight, heading toward the creek where Penny grazed contentedly, Hannah's trunk still miraculously attached to the saddle. "She's unharmed," Tom observed as they approached the mare. "Just got spooked and ran for water like most sensible creatures." Hannah slid from Midnight's back and approached her horse slowly. "Hello, girl," she murmured, stroking Penny's velvety nose. "You gave me quite a scare." With both horses recovered, they set out for Platteville. The day was warming quickly, promising heat by midday. They rode side by side now, Hannah on Penny and Tom on Midnight, following a trail that wound through rolling hills covered in sage and buffalo grass. "Tell me about Platteville," Hannah said after they'd ridden in silence for a while. "Is it a rough mining town?" "It was rougher a few years back," Tom replied. "The big silver strike was in '68. Things have settled some since then. There's a church, a school, several stores. Even a hotel with proper beds and a dining room where ladies can eat without being bothered. And my father, do you know Jeremiah Mills?" Tom's expression grew thoughtful. "I've met him. Older man, quiet type, keeps to himself mostly. Has a small claim outside town that produces just enough to keep him in supplies." "Is he truly ill?" Hannah couldn't keep the doubt from her voice. Tom glanced at her. "I heard he took a bad fall in his mine about a month ago. Doc Brady's been riding out to check on him regular-like." Hannah absorbed this information silently. After 10 years without a word, her father was suddenly summoning her to his deathbed. She wasn't sure what to feel: anger, resentment, or pity. "Family's complicated," Tom said, seeming to read her thoughts. "Do you have family, Tom?" Hannah asked, grateful to shift the focus from herself. "A sister in San Antonio. Parents passed years ago." His voice was matter of fact. "Kate, my sister, writes every month or so. Got 3 kids now." "You're an uncle," Hannah smiled. "Do you visit?" "When I can," Tom said. "It's a long journey and ranch work doesn't allow for much time off." By mid-morning, they crested a hill, and Hannah got her first glimpse of Platteville. The town sat in a natural bowl, surrounded by hills with the telltale scarring of mine entrances. It was larger than she'd expected, perhaps 50 buildings stretching along a main street, with smaller structures scattered around the periphery. A church steeple rose above the other rooftops, and she could see horses and wagons moving along the streets. "There it is," Tom said. "Not Denver, but it's got its charms." Hannah felt a flutter of anxiety. "My father's cabin, is it in town?" Tom shook his head. "About 2 miles northwest up that draw." He pointed to a narrow valley leading away from town, near his claim. They rode into Platteville just as the church bell was striking noon. The main street was busy with the lunchtime bustle, miners coming into town for meals, shopkeepers standing in doorways, women carrying baskets of shopping. Several people called greetings to Tom as they passed. "You're well known here," Hannah observed. "The Double Bar does business in town," Tom explained. "And in a place this size, everyone knows everyone." They stopped in front of a 2-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Platteville Hotel and Dining Room. Tom dismounted and came around to help Hannah down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met briefly before he stepped back. "You should get a room here," he suggested. "Rest and refresh yourself before heading out to your father's place." "I can take you there after you've had a proper meal." Hannah hesitated. "You've already done so much, I couldn't impose further." "It's no imposition," Tom said firmly. "I promised to get you safely to your father, and I mean to keep that promise." The sincerity in his voice persuaded her. "Thank you," Hannah said softly. "Your kindness is unexpected." A slight smile touched Tom's lips. "Don't judge all cowboys by those bandits, Miss Mills." They arranged for Hannah's room and stabled the horses. The hotel was simple but clean, and Hannah nearly cried at the sight of the washbasin filled with fresh water in her room. She quickly cleaned up and changed into one of the 2 spare dresses from her trunk, a navy blue cotton that was somewhat crushed from travel, but presentable. When she descended to the dining room, she found Tom waiting, his own appearance improved. He'd shaved and changed his shirt, though he still wore the same vest and denims. His hat was in his hands, and he turned it nervously as she approached. "You look." He began, then seemed to catch himself. "Refreshed." "Amazing what soap and water can accomplish," Hannah said with a small smile. They ate a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread. Throughout lunch, Hannah noticed people glancing their way with curious expressions. News traveled fast in small towns, and she suspected their arrival together was already the subject of speculation. "Perhaps we should head to my father's cabin soon," Hannah suggested as they finished eating. "I don't wish to be the cause of gossip." Tom nodded, understanding. "People will talk no matter what we do, but you're right, we should get you to your father's place before dark." They collected their horses and rode out of town, taking the northwest trail Tom had indicated earlier. As they left the bustle of Platteville behind, Hannah felt her anxiety returning. "What will I say to him after all these years?" she murmured, more to herself than to Tom. "The truth, I expect," Tom replied gently. "That's usually best, even when it's difficult." The trail narrowed as they entered the draw, forcing them to ride single file. Tom led the way, occasionally pointing out landmarks or interesting sights to distract Hannah from her worries. After about half an hour, they rounded a bend, and a small cabin came into view. It was a humble structure, log walls, a stone chimney, and a small porch with a rocking chair. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney, indicating someone was home. Behind the cabin, Hannah could see the entrance to a mine shaft shored up with timber. "That's it," Tom said, drawing Midnight to a halt. "Your father's place." Hannah stared at the cabin, her heart pounding. This was where her father had chosen to live rather than stay with her and her mother in their small home in Denver. She felt the old anger rising and fought to control it. "Would you like me to go with you?" Tom asked quietly. Hannah took a deep breath. "No, I think this is something I need to do alone." She slid from Penny's saddle, handing the reins to Tom. "But, would you mind waiting, just for a little while?" Tom's expression was understanding. "I'll be right here." With a grateful nod, Hannah straightened her dress and walked toward the cabin. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she forced herself to continue. At the porch, she paused, then knocked firmly on the weathered door. There was a long moment of silence, then the sound of shuffling footsteps. The door creaked open, revealing a gaunt man with white hair and a beard. He leaned heavily on a wooden cane, and his clothes hung loosely on his frame. "Hannah," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Is it really you?" Hannah barely recognized the man before her. The father she remembered had been robust and strong, with dark hair and laughing eyes. This man was a shadow, aged beyond his years. "Hello, Father," she said formally, struggling to keep her voice steady. Jeremiah Mill's eyes filled with tears. "You came. I didn't think you would, but you came." "Your telegram said you were dying," Hannah replied, unable to keep a hint of accusation from her tone. Her father's shoulders slumped. "Doc says my lungs are giving out, mining dust." He coughed as if to confirm the diagnosis. "Come in, please, it's been so long." Hannah followed him into the cabin, acutely aware of Tom's presence outside. The interior was sparsely furnished but tidy: a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, a narrow bed in the corner with a patchwork quilt. A shelf held a few books, and Hannah was surprised to see a framed photograph on the wall, herself and her mother, taken just before her father left them. "You kept our picture," she said, unable to hide her surprise. "Every day," Jeremiah said softly. "I looked at you both every day." "Yet you never came back." The words escaped before Hannah could stop them. "You never even wrote." Her father sank into one of the chairs, his cane propped against the table. "I have no excuses that would satisfy you, Hannah. I was a coward. I convinced myself you and your mother were better off without me." "Mother died 2 years after you left," Hannah said flatly. "I was 14, alone in the world." Jeremiah's face crumpled. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know until years later, when I finally worked up the courage to send a letter to our old address. The new occupants told me." His hands trembled as he wiped tears from his eyes. By then, I had no idea how to find you or if you'd even want to be found. Hannah stood stiffly, her arms crossed. How did you find me now? I hired a man, a Pinkerton detective last year. It took months, but he tracked you to that school in Denver. Jeremiah looked up at her, his eyes pleading. I was going to come to you, but then the accident happened. The mine collapsed while I was inside. I barely got out, but my lungs. He dissolved into a fit of coughing. Despite her anger, Hannah found herself moving to help him, pouring water from a pitcher on the table. Drink this. As her father sipped the water, Hannah noticed a letter on the table, partially written in a shaky hand. She caught a glimpse of her own name. Were you writing to me? She asked. Jeremiah nodded. Every day since I sent the telegram. I wasn't sure you'd come, so I was writing everything I wanted to say. He gestured weakly to a box under the table. They're all in there. Hannah knelt and pulled out the box. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to her but never sent. She opened one at random, her eyes scanning the faded ink. My dearest Hannah, today I watched the sunrise and wondered if you were seeing the same colors in Denver. Are your eyes still that remarkable shade of green like your mother's? Do you still bite your lip when you're thinking hard, the way you did as a child? There's so much I don't know about the woman you've become, and the fault is entirely mine. Hannah felt tears welling in her eyes as she read. Letter after letter contained apologies, memories, and questions about her life. Her father had been reaching out to her in his mind for years, even as he failed to do so in reality. Why didn't you ever send these? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. Shame, Jeremiah answered simply. And fear that you'd tear them up without reading them. I wouldn't have blamed you. Hannah sank into the chair opposite her father, the letters clutched in her hands. I don't know what you want from me now. Nothing you don't wish to give, he said. Just a chance to see you, to apologize in person before I die. To tell you that not a day has passed that I haven't regretted leaving you and your mother. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Hannah felt her carefully constructed wall of resentment beginning to crack. This broken man before her was not the villain she had created in her mind over the years, but a flawed human being who had made a terrible mistake. I'm a school teacher now, she found herself saying. In Denver, I teach third-level students, mostly immigrant children. Relief and joy spread across Jeremiah's face. Your mother would be so proud. She always said you had a gift for learning. They talked for over an hour, carefully at first, then with increasing openness. Hannah told her father about her life since his departure, the struggle after her mother's death, how she'd worked as a housekeeper while finishing her own education, her position at the school. Jeremiah shared stories of his years in the mining camps, his loneliness, his regrets. There's someone outside, Jeremiah noted when they'd reached a pause in their conversation. Been there the whole time, friend of yours. Hannah had almost forgotten about Tom. Yes, he rescued me yesterday when bandits attacked on the trail, then he escorted me here. Concern immediately flooded Jeremiah's face. Bandits, were you hurt? No, thanks to Mr. Navarro's intervention, Hannah assured him. He works at the Double Bar Ranch. Tom Navarro, Jeremiah's eyebrows rose. He's got quite a reputation as a marksman and tracker. You were fortunate he happened along. He studied his daughter's face. Might be you should invite him in. It's getting late, and I owe him my gratitude for bringing you safely to me. Hannah hesitated, then nodded. She went to the door and was surprised to find Tom still sitting patiently on midnight, Penny's reins in his hand. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the valley. Tom, she called, using his first name without thinking. Would you like to come in? My father wishes to thank you. Tom looked up, surprise evident on his face. He dismounted and secured both horses to the hitching post before approaching the cabin. I wasn't sure you'd still want me waiting, he admitted quietly as he reached her. I'm glad you stayed, Hannah replied, suddenly aware of how true those words were. Inside, Tom removed his hat and introduced himself properly to Jeremiah. The older man insisted Tom stay for supper, and despite initial protests about imposing, Tom agreed when he saw Hannah's silent plea. She wasn't ready to be alone with her father, just yet his presence provided a buffer, a sense of safety in emotionally treacherous waters. The meal was simple beans, salt pork, and biscuits that Jeremiah had prepared earlier, but the conversation flowed more easily than Hannah would have expected. Tom spoke about ranch life, careful to include both Mills in the discussion. He had a talent for storytelling, Hannah realized, as he described tracking the mountain lion that had led him to her rescue. As the evening wore on, Hannah noticed her father's increasing exhaustion. His coughing fits became more frequent, and pain lined his face despite his efforts to hide it. "You should rest, father," Hannah said gently after one particularly severe bout of coughing. Jeremiah nodded weakly. "Perhaps you're right." He looked between Hannah and Tom. "Will you be returning to town tonight?" Before Hannah could respond, Tom spoke up. "It's too dark to travel safely now, sir. If it's not an imposition, I could sleep in the lean-to I noticed behind your cabin. Miss Mills could take your bed and you could use your rocking chair by the stove." "I've seen you resting there when I've ridden past." Jeremiah seemed relieved by the suggestion. "That would be best. The trail can be treacherous at night, even for those who know it well, and so it was arranged." Tom excused himself to tend to the horses and set up his bedroll in the lean-to, while Hannah helped her father settle into his cushioned rocking chair by the stove. She was touched to see he had indeed fashioned it into a kind of bed, with pillows and blankets already in place. "You sleep here often?" she asked as she tucked a blanket around his thin shoulders. "Most nights," he admitted. "The bed's too soft after years of sleeping on the ground, and the chair helps with the coughing easier to breathe sitting up." Hannah felt a pang of sympathy. Whatever his past failures, her father was suffering now. "I'll make you some tea before I turn in. The hotel proprietress gave me some herbs that she said help with lung ailments." Jeremiah caught her hand. "Hannah, I know one evening doesn't erase 10 years, but having you here, it means everything to me." Hannah squeezed his hand gently. "Get some rest, father. We can talk more tomorrow." After making the tea and ensuring her father was as comfortable as possible, Hannah stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky like diamonds on black velvet. She found Tom sitting on a stump near the lean-to, smoking a cigarette. "I hope you don't mind the smoke," he said, moving to put it out when he saw her. "No, please," Hannah said, sitting on a nearby log. "My father used to smoke a pipe when I was a child. The scent is nostalgic." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the distant howl of coyotes and the gentle nickering of the horses. "Thank you," Hannah said finally, "for waiting today, for suggesting we stay tonight, for everything, really." Tom exhaled a stream of smoke. "You and your father needed time together. It wasn't my place to rush that." "How did you know?" Hannah asked softly. Tom was quiet for so long that Hannah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and reflective. "My father and I had a falling out when I was young, said things we both regretted. He died before we could reconcile." He tapped ash from his cigarette. "I always wished for one more conversation with him." Hannah felt a rush of gratitude for this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. "I'm sorry about your father." Tom nodded acknowledgement. "Life's too short for unresolved quarrels. When I heard your father was ill," he shrugged. "Seemed important you both had this chance." "He's dying," Hannah said, the reality of it finally sinking in. "I can see it in his eyes." "Yes," Tom agreed gently. "Doc Brady told me he doesn't expect Jeremiah to last through summer." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild evening. "I don't know how to feel. Part of me is still so angry with him, but seeing him like this." "You can be angry and still love him," Tom said. "The heart's complicated that way." Hannah looked at him in the moonlight, struck by the wisdom in his words. "For a cowboy, you're surprisingly insightful, Mr. Navarro." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Don't tell the boys at the ranch. They'd never let me hear the end of it." Hannah laughed softly, the sound surprising her. It felt strange to laugh outside her father's cabin while he lay dying inside, but also somehow a reminder that life continued even in the shadow of death. "I should get some sleep," she said, rising from the log. Tom stood as well, dropping his cigarette and grinding it out with his boot. "I'll be right out here if you need anything." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Hannah felt that same inexplicable connection she'd experienced by the campfire the previous night. "Good night, Tom," she said softly. "Good night, Hannah," he replied, her name a gentle cadence on his lips. Inside the cabin, Hannah found her father asleep in the rocking chair, his breathing labored but steady. She checked that the fire in the stove was banked safely for the night, then settled onto the narrow bed. Despite her emotional exhaustion, sleep was slow in coming. Her mind replayed the events of the past 2 days: the bandits, Tom's timely rescue, the reunion with her father, and most confusingly, the unexpected feelings stirring within her whenever Tom Navarro was near. Hannah woke at dawn to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation. Opening her eyes, she saw Tom and her father sitting at the table, mugs in hand, talking like old friends. There was something touching about the scene: the young, vital cowboy and the failing old miner finding common ground in the early morning light. "Ah, she wakes," Jeremiah said, noticing Hannah's movement. "Tom's been telling me about your adventure with the bandits. You're braver than I gave you credit for, daughter." Hannah sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress. "Mr. Navarro exaggerates. I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Tom said, pouring a third mug of coffee and bringing it to her. "It's facing danger despite being afraid." His fingers brushed hers as he handed her the mug, sending a flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Hannah took a sip to hide her confusion, the strong black coffee jolting her fully awake. "I need to head back to the double bar today," Tom said, returning to his seat. "Boss expects me back, and I've still got that mountain lion to track." Hannah felt a surprising stab of disappointment. She'd known Tom would leave. He had his own life, his own responsibilities, but somehow she'd pushed the thought aside. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "You've already done far more than could be expected." "You'll stay with your father?" Tom asked, his eyes searching hers. Hannah nodded. "For as long as he needs me." She glanced at Jeremiah, who was watching them both with a knowing expression that made her blush slightly. After breakfast, which Hannah insisted on preparing despite both men's protests, Tom prepared to depart. He checked Midnight's saddle and packed his few belongings with the same quiet efficiency Hannah had observed at the campsite. "I've left Penny's saddle in the lean-to," he told Hannah as she walked him to his horse. "She seems content in the small corral with your father's mule." "Thank you," Hannah said, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his eyes. "For everything." Tom adjusted his hat, his own gaze shifting to the distant mountains. "I ride this way often, checking the ranch's northern boundary. Would it be all right if I stopped by occasionally?" "To see how you and your father are getting on," hope blossomed in Hannah's chest. "Yes, we'd like that very much." Tom swung into the saddle, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Take care of yourself, Hannah Mills," he said softly, then touched his hat brim in a gesture of farewell before turning Midnight toward the trail. Hannah watched until horse and rider disappeared around the bend, aware of her father's presence as he came to stand beside her. "Fine man, that Tom Navarro," Jeremiah commented. "Yes," Hannah agreed simply, unable to articulate the tangle of emotions Tom's departure had left her with. "Known him for about 3 years now," her father continued. "Always stops to pass the time when he's riding by. Brought me supplies once during a bad snowstorm when I couldn't get to town." He glanced sideways at his daughter. "Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, though." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "Father, please, we barely know each other." Jeremiah chuckled, then coughed. "Sometimes that's all it takes. Your mother and I knew after one dance at a church social." Hannah helped her father back to the cabin, deflecting further comments about Tom. The day settled into a routine as Hannah cleaned the small cabin, prepared food, and listened to her father's stories about his years in Platteville. By evening, they had achieved a fragile peace, not the close relationship they might have had if he'd stayed, but a tentative bridge across the chasm of his abandonment. Days passed, falling into a pattern. Each morning, Hannah would walk to the nearby stream for fresh water, tend the small vegetable garden behind the cabin, and prepare meals. In the afternoons, when Jeremiah rested, she would read or write letters to the school in Denver, explaining her prolonged absence. Evenings were spent listening to her father's stories or sharing her own experiences from the past decade. True to his word, Tom appeared 4 days after his departure. Hannah was hanging laundry behind the cabin when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart quickened as she recognized Midnight's distinctive gait. "Afternoon, Miss Mills," Tom called, dismounting with a fluid grace that belied his size. "Mr. Navarro," Hannah replied, trying to sound composed despite the smile that insisted on spreading across her face. "What brings you this way?" "Ranch business," he said, his own lips quirking upward. "Thought I'd check on you and your father while I was passing by." Jeremiah emerged from the cabin, leaning heavily on his cane but his face brightening at the sight of their visitor. "Tom, perfect timing. Hannah's just made a fresh pot of coffee." The three sat outside, enjoying the warm afternoon and fresh coffee. Tom brought news from town and the surrounding ranches gossip about a wedding, the arrival of a new doctor to assist aging Doc Brady, rumors of a railroad spur potentially coming to Platteville. "Any luck with that mountain lion?" Jeremiah asked. Tom shook his head. "Crafty cat. Found tracks along the North Ridge yesterday but lost them in the rocks." He glanced at Hannah. "How are you settling in?" "Well enough," she replied. "Father's been teaching me the names of the local wildflowers." "She always did love flowers," Jeremiah said fondly. Even as a tiny thing, she'd collect dandelions and arrange them in cups around the house. Hannah felt a warmth in her chest at her father's memory. These moments of connection, of shared history, were slowly healing the wound of his abandonment. Tom stayed until the sun began to set, then reluctantly announced he needed to return to the ranch. "I'm on early duty tomorrow," he explained. "Will you come again?" Hannah asked as she walked him to his horse, aware of her father watching from the porch. "If you'd like me to," Tom replied, his voice low. "I would," Hannah said simply. He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face and made Hannah's breath catch. "Then wild horses couldn't keep me away." Over the next 3 weeks, Tom visited regularly, sometimes staying only long enough for a cup of coffee, other times remaining for supper. Each visit strengthened the connection between them. Hannah found herself looking forward to the sound of Midnight's approach, to Tom's deep voice and quiet laugh, to the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. Jeremiah watched their growing attachment with knowing eyes but said little. His own condition deteriorated steadily, his coughing fits becoming more severe, his body frailer by the day. Hannah cared for him with increasing tenderness, her childhood resentment giving way to a deep sadness for all they had lost and might have had. One afternoon, while her father napped, Hannah decided to explore the area around the cabin. She'd been so focused on caring for Jeremiah that she'd hardly ventured beyond the garden and stream. Taking a shawl against the breeze, she set out toward a small ridge that overlooked the valley. The climb was steeper than it looked, and Hannah was breathing hard by the time she reached the top. The view, however, was worth the effort. The valley spread out below her, Platteville visible in the distance, the mountains rising majestically beyond. Wildflowers dotted the hillside: purple lupine, bright yellow balsamroot, and delicate blue columbine. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Tom's voice came from behind her. Hannah turned in surprise. "Tom, I didn't hear you coming." He smiled as he approached, leading Midnight by the reins. "Midnight and I can move quietly when we need to." He gestured to the valley below. "I often stop here when I'm riding past, something peaceful about this view." I can see why, Hannah agreed, turning back to the panorama. It makes one feel both insignificant and part of something greater at the same time. Tom came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Your father's sleeping, Hannah nodded. The new medicine Doc Brady sent helps him rest more comfortably. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the wind rustling the grass around them. Hannah was acutely aware of Tom's presence, his height, the warmth radiating from him, the scent of leather and horses that clung to his clothes. Hannah, Tom said finally, his voice low. There's something I need to tell you. The seriousness of his tone made her turn to face him. What is it? Tom removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. I've been offered a job, foreman position at a ranch near Laramie. Oh, Hannah felt a sudden hollowness in her chest. That's wonderful. A foreman position is quite an advancement. It is, Tom agreed, his eyes holding hers. Better pay, more responsibility, the kind of position I've been working toward for years. Hannah forced a smile. When would you leave? That's just it. Tom took a step closer. I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Hope flickered in Hannah's heart. Me? Why? Tom's expression softened. Because in these past weeks, something's happened that I wasn't expecting, something between us. He gestured between them. I've known a lot of women, Hannah. Some good, some not so good, but I've never met anyone like you. Hannah's pulse quickened. Tom, let me finish, he said gently. I know the timing is all wrong. Your father's dying, you're still grieving what might have been with him. You have your teaching position in Denver. And I'm just a cowboy with dirt under my nails and not much to offer except hard work and loyalty. That's not true, Hannah protested. Tom smiled sadly. It is true. But despite all that, I find myself thinking about you all the time. When I'm riding fence lines, breaking horses, lying in my bunk at night, you're there in my thoughts. Hannah felt tears pricking her eyes. You're in mine too, she whispered, hope blazed in Tom's eyes. Am I? Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing her throat. Tom reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished. When she didn't, his calloused hand came to rest against her cheek. I don't want to leave Platteville now, he said softly. Not unless you're coming with me. Hannah leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of it. My father needs me here. I know, Tom agreed, and I would never ask you to leave him, not now, but when the time comes. He paused, swallowing hard. When your father passes, would you consider staying? Not returning to Denver. Hannah opened her eyes, meeting Tom's earnest gaze. Are you asking me to stay for you? I'm asking if there might be a chance for us, Tom clarified. If you feel what I feel, even a fraction of it. The honesty in his expression gave Hannah courage. I do feel it, she admitted. It terrifies me how quickly it happened, but I can't deny it's real. Joy transformed Tom's face. His other hand came up to frame her face, his touch reverent. May I kiss you, Hannah Mills? In answer, Hannah rose on her tiptoes, her hands resting on his solid chest as their lips met. The kiss was gentle at first, a question and an answer all at once. Then Tom's arms slipped around her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened into something that made Hannah's knees weak and her heart race. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tom rested his forehead against hers. I think I'm falling in love with you, he murmured. Hannah's heart soared at his words. I think I might be falling too, she whispered back. The moment was interrupted by a distant call. Hannah, Hannah, where are you? They separated quickly, though Tom kept hold of her hand. Your father's awake, he said, regret evident in his voice. I should go to him, Hannah replied, though she made no move to leave. Tom squeezed her hand gently. Go, I'll come by tomorrow and we can talk more. Hannah nodded, then impulsively rose on her tiptoes again to press another quick kiss to his lips. Tomorrow, she promised, then turned and hurried down the hill toward her father's voice. Jeremiah was standing on the porch, leaning heavily on his cane, his face pale with exertion. There you are, he said in relief. I woke and couldn't find you. I'm sorry to worry you, Hannah said, taking his arm and guiding him back inside. I was just up on the ridge looking at the view. With Tom Navarro, Jeremiah observed with a knowing smile. I saw him ride up. Hannah busied herself with stoking the stove. Yes, he happened by while I was there. Happened by, her father repeated skeptically. The same way he happens by almost every day now. Hannah turned to face him, deciding honesty was best. Father, I care for him and he cares for me. Jeremiah nodded slowly. I can see that plain as day. He's a good man, Hannah, the kind who stands by his word and protects what's his. It's very new, Hannah cautioned. We barely know each other. Sometimes that doesn't matter, her father said, easing into his chair. Your mother knew I was the one for her after our first meeting, said she saw something in my eyes that spoke to her heart. His expression grew wistful. She was right to trust that feeling. Our years together were the happiest of my life. Then why did you leave? The question that had burned in Hannah for a decade finally emerged. Jeremiah sighed heavily. Fear, pure and simple. The silver rush was on, and I convinced myself I could make our fortune out west. When months passed and I had nothing to show for it, pride kept me from coming home empty-handed. He shook his head in self-disgust. By the time I realized what I'd thrown away, it seemed too late to go back. Hannah sat across from him, studying the worn face of the man who had once been her hero. It's never too late until death, father, that's what mother always said. She was wiser than I deserved, Jeremiah agreed. His expression turned serious. Hannah, I don't have much time left. Anyone with eyes can see that. When I'm gone, I want you to be happy. If Tom Navarro makes you happy, don't let him slip away because you're afraid or uncertain. Life's too short for hesitation. Hannah felt tears well in her eyes. I'll try to remember that. Good. Jeremiah reached across the table to pat her hand. Now, was that a proper kiss he gave you up there on the ridge, or do I need to have a word with him about his intentions, father? Hannah exclaimed, her cheeks burning. Jeremiah laughed, the sound dissolving into coughing. When he recovered, his eyes were twinkling with mischief. The look on your face, just like when you were 12 and I caught you reading that romance novel your mother tried to hide. Despite her embarrassment, Hannah laughed too. In that moment, she felt closer to her father than she had since childhood, two adults sharing a joke, with the past's sharp edges finally beginning to soften. That night, as Hannah lay in bed listening to her father's labored breathing from the rocking chair, she allowed herself to think about Tom. His kiss had awakened feelings she'd never experienced before, a yearning, a sense of rightness, a completeness. She'd always been pragmatic about romance, assuming that if she ever married, it would be a practical arrangement based on mutual respect and compatibility. What she felt for Tom was anything but practical. It was wild and wonderful and frightening in its intensity. Could she really build a life here in Wyoming, so far from everything she'd known? Could she trust these feelings that had developed so quickly? As if in answer, Hannah remembered Tom's words on the ridge. I think I'm falling in love with you. The memory of those words, spoken in his deep, sincere voice, sent a shiver of happiness through her. Perhaps her father was right, some things were worth taking a chance on. The next morning dawned with dark clouds gathering over the mountains. Hannah woke early and prepared breakfast, trying to ignore the anticipation building within her at the thought of seeing Tom later. Her father seemed weaker than usual, picking at his food and coughing frequently. Maybe you should rest today, Hannah suggested, concerned by the gray pallor of his skin. Jeremiah nodded without argument, a sign of how poorly he was feeling. Think I will. Weather's changing, can feel it in my bones. Hannah helped him back to his chair by the stove, tucking blankets around him and making sure his medicine was within reach. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Just call. The air was heavy with impending rain as Hannah hung the washing on the line, hoping to get it dry before the storm hit. She kept glancing toward the trail, expecting to see Tom appearing at any moment. By midday, with the first raindrops beginning to fall, she accepted that he wasn't coming. Disappointment settled in her stomach like a stone. Perhaps he'd reconsidered after their kiss, Realized the complications of caring for a woman with obligations to a dying father and a teaching position hundreds of miles away. Or maybe ranch duties had simply kept him busy. Not every absence had a deeper meaning. Hannah was bringing in the still damp laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching too fast for a casual visit. She turned to see Tom riding hard toward the cabin, his hat pulled low against the rain, his expression grim. "Tom." She called as he dismounted, tying Midnight hastily to the porch post. "What's wrong?" "Those bandits," Tom said, water dripping from his hat brim. "The ones who attacked you. They hit a stage coach this morning about 10 miles south of here, shot the driver and guard." Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. "How awful," Tom nodded grimly. "Sheriff's forming a posse. I'm riding with them. We leave within the hour." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I had to see you before I went." Fear clutched at Hannah's heart. "These men are killers, Tom." "I know," he said softly, "but they need to be stopped before they hurt anyone else." His hands tightened on hers. "I'll be careful, I promise." Hannah searched his face, seeing determination and something else, a tenderness reserved just for her. "How long will you be gone?" Hard to say. "Could be days if they head into the mountains." Tom glanced at the cabin. "How's your father today?" "Not well," Hannah admitted. "The change in weather seems to be affecting him." Tom nodded, understanding. "I've asked Bill Mackenzie from the general store to ride out tomorrow to check on you both. He's a good man and he'll bring any supplies you need." Hannah was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you." Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a small revolver. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hand. "It's loaded. Do you know how to use it?" Hannah nodded. Her mother had insisted she learn after they were left alone. "I do, but surely it's not necessary." "Probably not," Tom agreed. "But it would make me feel better knowing you have it, just in case." The rain was falling harder now, soaking them both. Hannah knew Tom needed to leave. The posse would be waiting, but she couldn't bear to let him go, not with danger ahead. "Tom," she began, but words failed her. He seemed to understand anyway. Pulling her close, he kissed her with a passion that stole her breath and made her heart race. When they parted, he held her face between his hands, his eyes intense. "I'm coming back to you," he said firmly. "Remember that. No matter what happens, I'm coming back." Hannah nodded, blinking back tears. "I'll hold you to that promise, Thomas Navarro." With a final kiss, quick and hard, Tom mounted Midnight and rode away into the rain. Hannah watched until he disappeared, the revolver cold in her hand, her heart heavy with worry. Inside the cabin, Jeremiah was awake, his eyes questioning. "Tom riding with the posse." Hannah nodded, setting the revolver on the table and removing her wet shawl. "He came to tell me before he left." "Good man," Jeremiah murmured. "Takes responsibility seriously." Hannah busied herself making tea, trying to dispel the chill that had settled over her. "Father, do you believe people can fall in love quickly, in just weeks?" Jeremiah smiled weakly. "I proposed to your mother after knowing her 3 weeks. We were married a month later." His expression grew thoughtful. "When it's right, you know it deep in your bones. No amount of time makes it more or less true." Hannah brought him his tea, sitting beside him. "I'm afraid for him." "Natural to worry about those we love," her father said. He studied her face. "You do love him, don't you?" Hannah nodded slowly. "I think I do. It seems impossible, but—" "Nothing impossible about it," Jeremiah said firmly. "Just unexpected. The best things usually are." The storm intensified as evening approached, rain hammering the roof and wind howling around the cabin's corners. Hannah prepared a simple supper, though neither she nor her father had much appetite. Jeremiah seemed to be fading before her eyes, his breathing more labored, his voice weaker. "Should I ride for the doctor?" Hannah asked, concern overriding her fear of the storm. Jeremiah shook his head. "No use, daughter. Nothing Doc Brady can do now except make me comfortable, and I've got medicine for that." He reached for her hand. "Stay with me instead." Hannah sat beside him, holding his frail hand in hers. "I'm here, Father." "You know," he said after a while, his voice barely audible above the storm, "I never expected to see you again in this life. Getting to spend these weeks with you has been a gift I didn't deserve." Don't talk like that, Hannah protested, though she knew his words were true. Jeremiah smiled faintly. We both know I'm dying, Hannah, no sense pretending otherwise. He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. I need you to know that leaving you and your mother was the worst mistake of my life. I've regretted it every day for 10 years. Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks. I know that now. Your forgiveness means everything to me, Jeremiah continued, more than I can say. His eyes drifted to the window where lightning illuminated the night. I hope Tom makes it back safely. He's the kind of man who'll cherish you properly. Father, Hannah began. Let me finish, Jeremiah insisted. The cabin and claim are yours after I'm gone. It's not much, but it's something to start with. If you decide to stay in Platteville with Tom, you'll have a home. Hannah's tears fell faster. Thank you. Jeremiah's eyes were growing heavy. I'm tired now. Think I'll rest a while. Hannah helped him take his medicine, then sat beside him as he drifted to sleep, his breathing ragged but steady. The storm raged outside, and Hannah found herself praying for her father's peaceful passing when his time came, and for Tom's safe return from the dangers he faced. 3 days passed with no word from Tom or the posse. The storm had cleared, leaving behind mud and debris, but the skies were blue once more. Hannah cared for her father, whose condition continued to deteriorate, and tried not to watch the trail too obviously for approaching riders. Bill Mackenzie from the general store kept his promise, arriving the day after the storm with supplies and news. The posse had tracked the bandits into the mountains, he reported. No one had returned yet, but that wasn't unusual for such a pursuit. He promised to bring any news as soon as it arrived in town. On the 4th morning, Hannah woke to find her father watching her from his chair, his eyes clearer than they had been in days. Good morning, she said, hurrying to check on him. How are you feeling? Better, Jeremiah replied, his voice surprisingly strong, like a weight's been lifted. Hannah felt his forehead, finding it cool to the touch. Your fever's broken. For now, he agreed. Don't get your hopes up, daughter. It's just a temporary reprieve. Happens sometimes near the end. Hannah knew he was right. She'd seen it before with her mother, but she couldn't help feeling grateful for this moment of clarity and relative comfort. Would you like to sit outside today? The sun is warm. Jeremiah nodded. I'd like that. They spent the morning on the small porch, Jeremiah wrapped in blankets despite the warmth, sharing memories of Hannah's childhood and her mother. There was a peacefulness between them that Hannah treasured, knowing it might be fleeting. It was early afternoon when they heard riders approaching. Hannah's heart leaped and she stood to shade her eyes against the sun. 3 horsemen were coming up the trail and one of them was Tom. He's back, Hannah breathed, relief washing over her. Jeremiah smiled weakly. Go to him. Hannah hesitated, not wanting to leave her father alone, but he waved her away. Go on. I'm not going anywhere in the next few minutes. She hurried down the path, her skirts gathered in her hands, joy and relief making her careless of dignity. Tom saw her coming and spurred midnight ahead of his companions. He dismounted in a fluid motion and caught Hannah as she flung herself into his arms. You're safe, she murmured against his chest, breathing in his scent of leather and horses and something uniquely Tom. His arms tightened around her. I told you I'd come back. Hannah pulled back to look at him, noting the exhaustion in his face, the several days' growth of beard and a fresh cut above his right eye. You're hurt. Just a scratch, Tom assured her. Caught a branch riding through the forest at night. The other riders had caught up now, Sheriff Davis and his deputy, both looking as tired as Tom. Miss Mills, the sheriff greeted her, touching his hat brim. Hope you don't mind us stopping for water before we head back to town. Of course not, Hannah replied. Please help yourselves to the well. There's coffee inside if you'd like some. While the sheriff and deputy saw to the horses, Tom kept his arm around Hannah's waist. We got them, he said quietly. All 3, they won't be troubling anyone again. You had to kill them, Hannah asked, searching his face. Tom shook his head. They're alive, in custody. They'll stand trial in Cheyenne. His expression hardened slightly. They didn't come willingly, though. There was a fight. Hannah touched the cut above his eye gently. "Is that how this happened?" "No, that really was a branch," Tom admitted with a small smile, "but I did take a punch or two elsewhere." Hannah's eyes widened. "Are you seriously hurt?" "Nothing that won't heal," Tom assured her. His expression softened as he gazed down at her. "How's your father?" "Having a good day today," Hannah replied, "but I think the end is near." Tom nodded, understanding. "I'm sorry." "Having you back safely helps," Hannah said simply. After the sheriff and deputy had refreshed themselves, they continued on to town, leaving Tom behind at Hannah's request. He needed rest, she insisted, and her father would want to see him. The sheriff agreed readily, telling Tom to take the next day off as well. "You earned it, Navarro," he said with a respectful nod. Jeremiah was delighted to see Tom, insisting on hearing about the pursuit and capture of the bandits. Tom downplayed his own role but shared the story as they sat on the porch in the afternoon sun. Hannah watched the two men, one at the end of his life journey, one in his prime, and felt a rush of affection for them both. As evening approached, Jeremiah's energy began to fade. Hannah helped him back inside while Tom stabled Midnight with Penny and the mule. When Tom entered the cabin, he found Hannah tucking blankets around her father, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep. "He overdid it today," Hannah said softly as Tom joined her by the stove. "But he enjoyed himself, I think." Tom nodded, his eyes gentle as he regarded her. "You look tired too." "I am," Hannah admitted. "It's been a long few days." "Why don't you rest?" Tom suggested. "I'll keep watch over your father." Hannah hesitated. "You're the one who's been chasing bandits through the mountains. You need sleep more than I do." "I caught some rest last night," Tom countered, "and I'm used to going without sleep on the trail." He gently turned her toward the bed. "Just a few hours, Hannah. I promise to wake you if anything changes with your father." Too exhausted to argue further, Hannah allowed herself to be guided to the bed. She lay down fully clothed, intending only to rest her eyes for a moment. The last thing she remembered was the sensation of a blanket being drawn over her and Tom's gentle touch on her hair. When Hannah woke, the cabin was dark except for the soft glow of the banked fire in the stove. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, then remembered Tom's return. He was sitting in the second chair beside her father, his head drooping in sleep, one hand still resting on Jeremiah's wrist, as if monitoring his pulse even in slumber. The scene brought tears to Hannah's eyes, this strong, capable man keeping gentle vigil over her dying father. In that moment, any lingering doubts about her feelings for Tom vanished completely. She loved him with a certainty that went bone deep. Moving quietly, Hannah approached the two men. Tom stirred at her footsteps, instantly alert despite his exhaustion. "Everything all right?" he whispered, glancing at Jeremiah, who remained asleep. Hannah nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You should get some real rest. Take the bed." Tom shook his head. "I'm fine here." "At least stretch out by the stove," Hannah insisted. "You're too tall for that chair." With a reluctant nod, Tom moved to the bearskin rug by the stove, stretching his long frame on the floor. Hannah brought him a pillow and blanket, then took his place beside her father. As she settled into the chair, she glanced over to find Tom watching her, his eyes reflecting the stove's soft light. "What?" she whispered when his gaze didn't waver. "Just thinking how lucky I am," he replied quietly. "To have found you." Hannah smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "I think I'm the lucky one." Tom's eyes drifted closed, a faint smile on his lips as sleep claimed him again. Hannah turned her attention to her father, whose breathing had become more labored. She knew the peaceful moments they'd shared that day had been a final gift, not a sign of recovery. Her medical knowledge was limited, but she recognized the approaching end. Throughout the night, Hannah sat vigil, occasionally rising to tend the fire or moisten her father's dry lips with a damp cloth. Tom woke several times, offering to take her place, but Hannah gently refused. This was her duty, her privilege, these final hours with the father she had both loved and resented for so long. Dawn was just breaking when Jeremiah opened his eyes, clarity and recognition in his gaze. "Hannah," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm here, Father," she said, taking his hand, "your mother." Jeremiah murmured, "I can see her waiting." Hannah's throat tightened with emotion. "Tell her I love her." Jeremiah's lips curved in a faint smile. "She knows, she always knew." His breathing grew more labored. "Thank you for coming, for forgiving." "I love you, Father," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "Love you, too." Jeremiah's eyes moved past her to where Tom stood quietly behind her chair. "Take care of her with my life," Tom promised solemnly. Jeremiah seemed satisfied with this answer. His eyes drifted closed again, and over the next hour his breathing gradually slowed until, with one final exhale, it stopped altogether. Hannah sat motionless, her father's hand still clasped in hers, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the cabin window. "He's gone," she said finally, her voice hollow. Tom's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a warm, steady presence. "He went peacefully with his daughter beside him. That's a blessing many don't get." Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Tom stood with her in silence, offering his strength and support without words. When she finally released her father's hand and rose from the chair, Tom's arms opened, and she went into them without hesitation, letting her tears flow freely against his chest. They buried Jeremiah Mills that afternoon on a small rise behind the cabin, where wildflowers bloomed among the grass. Tom dug the grave while Hannah prepared her father's body, washing and dressing him in his best clothes, placing a photograph of her mother in his pocket. The service was simple, just Hannah and Tom, with Bill Mackenzie and Doc Brady riding out from town when they heard the news. Hannah read from her father's worn Bible, and Tom spoke a few words about Jeremiah's kindness and resilience. When the last shovelful of earth was in place, Hannah placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave. "I'll have a proper marker made," Tom promised as they walked back to the cabin, the other men having returned to town. "With both your parents' names, if you'd like." Hannah nodded gratefully. "I would like that." She paused, looking back at the fresh grave. "It's strange. For years I was so angry with him, and now I just feel sad for all the time we lost. But grateful for the time you had at the end," Tom suggested gently. "Yes," Hannah agreed. "Exactly that." The next few days passed in a blur of practical matters. Hannah sorted through her father's few possessions, setting aside keepsakes and donating the rest to the church in Platteville. She sent a telegram to the school in Denver, explaining her father's death and requesting an extended leave of absence. Tom rode back and forth from the Double Bar Ranch, fulfilling his duties there but spending every free moment at the cabin with Hannah. A week after Jeremiah's funeral, Hannah and Tom sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Neither had spoken directly of the future since Tom's proposal on the ridge, both respecting Hannah's need to grieve. "I received a reply from the school today," Hannah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "They've granted me leave until the end of summer, but they expect me back for the fall term." Tom nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "And will you go back?" Hannah turned to face him fully. "That depends. On what?" Tom asked, though she suspected he knew. "On whether certain opportunities are still available here," Hannah replied, her heart pounding. Tom's eyes searched hers. "Are you asking if my feelings have changed? Have they?" Hannah held her breath. In answer, Tom took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I love you, Hannah Mills. That hasn't changed and won't change whether you stay or go." His eyes were steady on hers. "But I hope you'll stay, build a life here with me." Joy bloomed in Hannah's chest. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "And yes, I want to stay, to build that life together." Tom's face lit with happiness. He drew her close, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't have much to offer yet," he said quietly. "The foreman position at the Laramie Ranch is still open, but even that's a modest living. I don't need riches." Hannah assured him. "And I can teach here in Platteville. They've been without a school teacher since spring." Tom smiled. "You've thought this through?" "I have," Hannah admitted. "These past days, while sorting father's things, I've had time to consider what I truly want." She touched Tom's face gently. "And what I want is you, Thomas Navarro, a life with you." "Then that's what you shall have," Tom promised, gathering her into his arms. They were married 2 months later in the small church in Platteville, with the entire town turning out for the celebration. Hannah wore a simple white dress ordered from Denver, and Tom looked uncommonly handsome in a new suit that clearly made him uncomfortable, but that he endured with good grace for his bride's sake. After the ceremony, they rode in a flower-bedecked wagon to the cabin, their home now, where neighbors and friends gathered for a feast and dancing that lasted well into the night. When the last guest had departed, Tom carried Hannah across the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. "Welcome home, Mrs. Navarro," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "It's been my home for months now," Hannah pointed out, her eyes shining with happiness. Tom shook his head. "No, it was just a place you were staying. Now it's our home." Hannah wrapped her arms around his neck, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "Our home," she agreed. "I like the sound of that." Life settled into a rhythm as summer gave way to fall. Tom accepted the foreman position at the Bar M Ranch, which was closer to Platteville than the Laramie offer would have been. Hannah began teaching at the town school, quickly winning the respect of both students and parents with her dedication and innovative teaching methods. They expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the main living area. On weekends, they worked together in the garden or rode across the countryside, Hannah's riding skills improving under Tom's patient instruction. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, talking about their days, making plans, or simply enjoying the companionable silence between two people who understand each other deeply. When winter came, bringing snow and bitter cold, they weathered it together, finding joy in the simple pleasures of a warm hearth, good books read aloud, and each other's company. Tom proved to be a thoughtful, gentle husband, and Hannah discovered a passion within herself that matched his own. Spring arrived with the news that Hannah was expecting their first child. Tom's reaction, pure joy followed by protective concern, endeared him to her even more. He immediately began planning additions to the cabin, including a nursery and a larger kitchen. "We don't need all that right away," Hannah laughed as Tom sketched plans at the table one evening, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Maybe not," Tom agreed, "but I want our child to have room to grow, and I want you to have a comfortable home." Hannah's heart swelled with love for this man who had saved her from bandits and in doing so had changed the course of her life. "We already have that," she said softly. "Anywhere with you is home to me." Tom's expression softened as he rose and came to her side, placing his hand over hers on her stomach. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "A wife, a child on the way, a place that's truly mine. For years, I was just drifting from one job to the next, one town to another. What changed?" Hannah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Tom smiled, the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "I saw a brave school teacher facing down 3 bandits without flinching, and something inside me just clicked into place." Hannah leaned her head against his solid chest. "I'm glad you happen to be tracking that mountain lion." "So am I," Tom agreed, "though I never did catch that cat," Hannah laughed. "Perhaps that's for the best. If you had, you might not have heard the shots and come to my rescue." "I'd have found you somehow," Tom said with conviction. Some things are meant to be. Their son, James Jeremiah Navarro, was born the following winter, a healthy, robust boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Tom proved to be a natural father, handling the infant with surprising gentleness for hands so calloused by ranch work. By the time James called Jimmy by everyone except Hannah, who insisted on his proper name, was taking his first steps, the cabin had been transformed into a proper home. Tom's promised improvements had materialized, along with a sturdy fence, a larger corral for the horses, and a vegetable garden that was the envy of neighboring homesteaders. Hannah continued teaching, bringing Jimmy with her to school until he was old enough to stay home with Mrs. Peterson, an elderly neighbor who was delighted to care for the boy while his parents worked. Tom's position as foreman brought them financial stability and respect in the community. They weren't wealthy, but they wanted for nothing important. 5 years after their wedding, on the anniversary of their first meeting, Tom surprised Hannah with a special gift, the deed to a piece of land adjoining their property, with access to a year-round stream and excellent grazing. "What's this for?" Hannah asked, puzzled by the document. Tom's eyes gleamed with excitement. "I'm starting my own ranch, small at first, just a few dozen head, but it's a beginning." Hannah's eyes widened. "Your own ranch, but how, when?" "I've been saving," Tom explained. "And the owner of the double bar is getting older, looking to sell pieces of his land. He gave me a fair price." He took her hands in his. "I want to build something that's ours, something we can pass on to Jimmy and his brothers and sisters if we're blessed with more children." Tears of happiness filled Hannah's eyes. "We are blessed," she said softly, "more than I ever dreamed possible." As if on cue, 4-year-old Jimmy burst into the cabin, his cheeks flushed from play. "Papa, I saw a deer by the creek, a big one with antlers." Tom swept the boy up into his arms. "Did you now? Was it as big as you?" "Bigger," Jimmy exclaimed, spreading his arms wide. "Much bigger." Hannah watched her husband and son, her heart full to bursting with love for them both. How strange and wonderful life was, she reflected. If those bandits hadn't attacked her on the trail from Denver, if Tom hadn't happened to be tracking that mountain lion, if she hadn't answered her father's summons, any change in that chain of events might have led to an entirely different life. Later that evening, after Jimmy was asleep, Hannah and Tom sat on the porch as they often did, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "Do you ever wonder," Hannah asked softly, "what might have happened if you hadn't come along that day?" Tom was quiet for a moment, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at you, at Jimmy, at our home, and I know that somehow, some way we would have found each other." Hannah smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Because some things are meant to be." "Exactly," Tom agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Some things are written in the stars long before we ever know it." As if to punctuate his words, a shooting star streaked across the night sky, brief and brilliant. Hannah made a silent wish, not for anything new, but for the continuation of this life they'd built together, this love that had begun with danger and rescue and had grown into something strong and enduring. "I love you, Thomas Navarro," she whispered. "And I love you, Hannah Navarro," he replied, the name still sounding like a cherished gift on his lips after all these years. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days that follow." In the soft Wyoming night, with the man she loved beside her and their child sleeping peacefully inside, Hannah felt a sense of completion that she had never expected to find when she'd set out alone on that dangerous trail years ago. A cowboy's intervention had indeed changed both their paths, guiding them to this shared journey that was more beautiful than either could have imagined alone.